All right, this is episode 2. We're going to talk about Mafia myths and misconceptions. What's up, Pete?
Hey man, how's it going?
Good. Can't complain.
I think the biggest myth and misconception is that it is like a thing of honor. You know, at the end of the day, these people are criminals. They're killers. It's about money, greed. They stab each other in the back constantly. So that's like the biggest myth right off the bat is that these guys are somehow any better than street hoodlums, because the mafia has done a lot of damage, economic wise and obviously crime wise, especially at their peak, man. Like, they infiltrated all these unions, they were stealing from workers. They were killing innocent people, sometimes got caught in the crossfire. That's another like big myth right off the bat. While it is true that yes, historically it is kind of rare, you're not as likely to get killed by a mafioso as a random schizophrenic, but it does happen. For example, in the 90s Colombo War, there was a bakery assistant who I guess they walked into the bakery. This was between the Arena and Persico factions, and I guess they thought this was someone's son or like related to someone, and so they just shot this kid dead. And during that same war, in the same year in the 90s, a nun or former nun was also caught in some crossfire. The stuff in Italy where, entire bloodlines were killed. They'd kill 12-year-old boys if they were related to someone. Just horrible stuff. And I'm sure, as as someone who's into the Camorra aspect of things, there's been a few cases of women being killed, and same as American Cosa Nostra, Tommy Karate Patera, he killed a woman who had given his girlfriend drugs. So it does happen. Innocent people, get caught in this thing.
100%. It happened a lot, yeah.
I just want, as you know, the Philadelphia family, it was run by Angelo Bruno at its peak for like a long time, from the 50s to 80s, and it was pretty stable. But at least on paper, Bruno forbid the sale of drugs. His consigliere, Antonio Caponigro, he wanted to get involved in the drug business. So he went to the Genovese, and the Genovese family, Frank Thierry specifically, kind of was like, oh, you have our approval, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, even though they didn't. Just because, there was some 4D chess going on where Philly at that point was technically connected to the Gambinos. And I guess the Genovese wanted more of a piece of the pie in Philly, and they wanted Philly under their thumb.
Oh.
So Caponigro goes ahead with the hit for Angelo Bruno. And then he gets summoned to New York, and the Genovese leadership are like, what the fuck? Like, why did you do this? Like, this wasn't sanctioned. And in the book Mafia Prince, which is about like the Nicky Scarfo years, it's a very good book. Anyway, in the book, it tells a story where Antonio Caponigro says to this Frank Thierry, he's like, what do you mean? You said it was okay. And that just kind of shows the kind of Machiavellianism of it, right? Because this guy's like, nope, we never told you that. And they beat this guy to death and killed him and shoved dollar bills up his ass and left him on the street.
Wow.
As a warning, like, oh, this is what happens when you kill a boss, even though they were involved in that.
They just wanted the money. They've been doing this drug thing since the 20s, maybe way before that.
Well, yeah, going into the drug thing, drugs are another big myth. There's the common person kind of has. I've heard like people in my like real life say this to me, like, oh, the mafia never dealt drugs, and I'm like, you're like, what are you talking about? Like, I know that's kind of like a movie thing, like, there's that Goodfellas scene,
yeah,
where Paul Cicero, in real life his name was Paul Vario, he tells Hill, he's like, no drugs, whatever, right? By the way, in real life, Paul Vario was a real piece of shit. He like was a rapist. He beat women. Like, he wasn't this like kindly, domineering father figure that Goodfellas portrays him to be. Drugs have been around since the beginning. Luciano was involved in drugs. Technically, he ratted to the police over a drug deal, as I mentioned in the last episode.
Yeah.
Vito Genovese, who was the follow-up to Luciano for the Genovese family, big drug dealer, involved with it in Italy, involved with it in America. You have Joe Bonanno and Carmine Galante. The Bonannos historically have always been super big with drug dealing, heroin, the pizza and French connection, sorry. The Luccheses were pretty big into it. Carmine Tremonti, who was at one point the Lucchese acting boss. Joe Di Palermo and his brothers, other Lucchese guys, drug dealers. Then, of course, there's the Cherry Hill Gambinos, which were they were Gambino members, but they were like Zips. They were Sicilians,
Yep.
and they ran a crew, and primarily they were dealing drugs, and the Gambino hierarchy just didn't give a shit and just let it happen.
You were talking about the Luccheses before. Wasn't there a big bust not too long ago with them?
Oh well, Matty Madonna, who was the acting boss of Lucchese's back then in the 2010s,
Yep.
he actually came up as a drug dealer. He was involved with a group called the East Harlem Purple Gang when he was just before he was a member of Lucchese's, and these dudes were like pushing heroin, coke, so that's kind of crazy how you have this general attitude. And there were definitely guys like Tony Ducks Corallo, who was Lucchese boss in the 80s and 70s. And there's a wiretap of him saying we should kill drug dealers, like as a warning. Like, there were definitely some older guys who were kind of against it, but it was never like an official thing that was put into action about the no drug rule. It was always kind of just accepted.
I know Big Paul, he didn't accept it, but that was because he had, big construction jobs and he didn't want that other crap getting involved.
Yeah, I mean, even him, I'm sure he accepted some envelopes. And that's not even just what the mafia has kind of accepted. Disgustingly so. There's been cases of them accepting envelopes from I don't want to say the word, but it's child. Robert DiBernardo, who was a DB. I think they mentioned him in the Gotti movie a few times. He was a Gambino guy in the 80s, and he was involved in the industry. And apparently he used to be involved in that, and he was giving envelopes to the hierarchy from that. So I don't know if they knew about that, but the FBI did. Same as Roy DeMeo. I don't know if it's Nino. I think it's Nino Gaggi, who was a Gambino captain. I think there is actually a story of him learning about that, and he threatens to kill DeMeo, but DeMeo he offers him like a bigger cut, and he's just like, oh, okay, we'll just like don't fucking talk about it. So that's
Yeah.
disgusting. I can understand kind of circumventing the drug rule and kind of getting away with it, but this is a whole different ball game, that sort of shit.
I agree that's unacceptable anywhere.
Yeah. But that's another myth is that like, oh, the mafia doesn't hurt kids, they don't do this. And again, like 90% of them probably did find that disgusting, but the fact that it happened, period,
Yep.
like, it still slips through the cracks. Another like kind of myth is that Joe Bellacci was like the first informant. I think he was like the first public on TV informant, but Gregory Scarpa, who was a Colombo guy, apparently he had been giving info to the feds like long before Valachi, but even in the 1920s, like I said, like, Luciano technically ratted when he gave up that drug information. So Valachi, yeah, sure, he was kind of, I would say, one of the first public ones, but he wasn't the first guy to actually flip. Another kind of myth, I think I touched on this last time, is that the Chicago outfit wasn't LCN. Like it was kind of its own organization that wasn't connected. We know right off the bat that this is bullshit. I don't understand why people say this. We have testimony from guys like Nick Calabrese of them doing making ceremonies,
Right.
with a burning saint. So, they're still making guys. It is true that, yeah, they're, at least according to FBI charts at the time, there were associates of non-Italian descent who were a little bit, high up to the point where they were kind of like captains, even though they weren't captains. But that doesn't make it not LCN. That just means that there's powerful associates.
Right.
You see that in the Gambinos with Joe Watts or James Burke with the Luccheses, just these street guys who weren't made, but technically they were powerful than some fucking made guys.
Yeah.
So yeah, that doesn't make the outfit not LCN. And even Al Capone, he was inducted by Joe Masseria. So Even him, you hear that a lot. He's like, oh, he was from Naples. He wasn't like a mobster. He was still a mobster, even if he
Okay.
was from Naples. He was inducted and sent out to Chicago with Torrio. So he was from Brooklyn.
Yeah, Torrio helped him out a lot, and then Capone, in my opinion, Capone's one of the biggest money making machine.
I agree. Capone ran judges. Capone ran like everything. It was a whole different ball game in the 20s. He got away with a lot of stuff that he wouldn't have been able to get away with if he was like a New York guy in the 80s. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Another myth I just want to say, I don't know if this is really a myth. It's more of a misconception that you have to be 100% Italian. Sure, at one point it was a rule that you had to be 100%, but historically there's been guys like Chucky Porter, who was a Pittsburgh member. He was half Italian on his mother's side. His father was Irish or English, I don't remember which. And he was inducted. He became the underboss, I believe, of the Pittsburgh family. And then Philadelphia, there was a guy named John Vesey who, same thing. He was only Italian on his mother's side, I believe. And even then, it's kind of up for debate. But he was inducted into Philly during the 90s war. John Gotti Jr., too. John Gotti Jr. was part Jewish. John Gotti's wife was a Eastern European, Ashkenazi, I think, Jew.
yeah. They weren't really checking, I don't think, because come on, look at Joe Pistone. They were gonna make him, and he was a FBI guy. They didn't look into his background.
Yeah, he came just a typical Bonanno mess there, but like uh you do even like that Giovanni Rocco guy, the guy I talked about in the last episode, the New Jersey undercover. Charles Stango supposedly told him like we're gonna straighten you out. Like,
Yeah,
how do you like not like I understand with the Brasco situation, this was before social media and like before like, people knew they could go to City Hall and like look into people. But
yeah,
like that happened in like the 2010s, the Stango thing. I know there was a guy, I don't remember his first name. His last name is Campos. There was some issue with him, I think, getting made where they thought he was half Spanish or something, but it turned out they did do their homework and they checked him out and he was Italian.
okay. Well, that's one instance there. Yeah,
Spilotro, it's weird. That's another kind of myth. A lot of people refer to him as like a boss in Vegas. He was just a soldier. He wasn't a capo even
yeah,
officially. He just kind of was running his he had a little like crew and they were overseeing the skim. Not just Chicago, like Kansas. There's a Kansas, Kansas, Cleveland. A lot of those Midwest families were involved in that. But for the outfit, Spilotro was kind of overseeing things there. Oh, I guess another misconception is he wasn't actually beaten to death in a field. Him and his brother were beaten to death, but it was in a basement of the house. Billy Bats, there's a likelihood he wasn't actually made in real life, and he was just a high-ranking associate, because he was super young at that point, and the books would have been closed at that
yeah,
for him to be made. Luciano didn't start the five families; they were already established. Mangano, Profaci. Um, a lot of these families were already a thing. They were just either under different names or they just weren't formally on the commission.
right.
I was gonna say, Sonny Francesi wasn't actually the underboss of the Colombos until the 2000s when he was released from prison, and he was like very briefly underboss.
Wow.
So Michael Francesi says this thing that Carlo Gambino, or sorry, not Carlo Gambino, sorry, Sonny Francesi was the underboss in the 60s. Yeah, so it was this guy, Salvatore Musacchio. He was the boss in the early 60s. So Sonny Francesi would have went to jail around that time, so he wouldn't have been underboss until he got out in the 2000s.
So Michael Francis, he's a bullshit artist.
Well, he wants to prop up his own name, and by saying that Sonny was the underboss, he kind of gives himself a boost. Like, oh, I was the son of the underboss. Again, yeah, like the FBI state that Francesi was the underboss of the 2000s when he got out of jail briefly, but in the 60s, they have someone completely pegged differently.
Wow.
You know Vito Spatafore's storyline from The Sopranos?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's based on a guy named John D'Amato, who was he was a high-ranking figure in the DeCavalcante family in the 80s. So he was killed supposedly for being gay, but according to FBI documents, it was more so that they did use that as an excuse, but it was more so that he was getting too close to New York members of different families, and they felt like he was getting too much influence, essentially. Another one is have you seen the movie Bugsy?
No.
Okay, so it's a movie about Bugsy Siegel. Came out in the 90s. As a movie, it's pretty good. I don't mind it, but the movie seems to imply that New York sent. You know who Bugsy Siegel is, obviously.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so New York sent him out. He was a high-ranking Jewish associate. They sent him out to Vegas and also L.A., more so L.A. at the time. And the movie and a lot of people seem to like make this claim that he was in charge of Los Angeles. Jack Dragna was the boss of the LA family at this point, and there's a scene in the movie where Siegel is like slapping him around essentially. Uh, even if, even though Dragna and LA were never as strong as New York, there is no fucking way an associate is gonna. The guy is a made guy, like that just wouldn't happen. Um, in reality, Siegel was actually working alongside and occasionally answering up to Jack Dragna. But he was not this kind of like one man army that
Yeah.
some people make Siegel out to be. Um, Siegel's another one who had a rape charge when he was younger, so that says a lot about his character too.
All right, so that was some of the mob's myths and misconceptions. Michael Francis, he's a bullshit artist. I just wanted to say that again. And that's Serious and Pete podcast.
Yeah, see ya.
Take care.